IELTS General Test, Task 1, Letter Writing. I'm going to be teaching you the importance of planning before you start your letter writing. I'm going to give you a sample letter that has a big problem in it because the student did not write a plan before writing this letter. I'm going to give you a model answer to show you how you can write this letter. I'm also going to be going into quite a bit of detail about the grading criteria, and I'm going to highlight a potential danger in this criteria for you. In this video, I'm going to mention that IELTS is a cruel test, and I'm going to tell you why. See if you can note the reason why I say IELTS is a cruel test when you're watching this video. I'll give you the answer at the end in case you miss it. Let's start off by looking at our task sequence for writing a letter. Now, remember that you've only got about 20 minutes to write your letter. Resist the temptation of just jumping in and starting to write the letter. It's important that you go through these steps because these steps that I'm going to show you will help save you time because you won't have to keep stopping and thinking while writing your letter, and also it's going to result in a better letter, a better response to the task instructions. Okay, so let's have a look what we should be doing. Essentially, I've got 5 steps that I think you should be following. First of all, you should start off by reading the question. This is really important so that you understand the requirements of the task. And the typical requirements: asking for help, requesting information, apologizing, complaining, or thanking. You'll see that the one we're going to be doing today is asking for help. Next, I suggest that you underline key words in the task instructions. This serves 2 purposes. 1, to make sure you understand the instructions. 2, to rephrase these key words so that when you start writing your letter, you'll be able to show your talent in paraphrasing given words to the examiner. This is very important for getting a high score for lexical resource. Paraphrasing is one of the indicators. Next, you want to brainstorm or plan how you're going to answer the question. You might have to think about a situation. Also note that there are always 3 bullet points or 3 questions to respond to, and you want to think about your response to these 3 bullet points first. This is extremely important because sometimes how you answer one bullet point is going to determine how you respond to another one. You're going to see this exact idea in this letter, and you're going to see the reason why it is so important to plan your letter in advance before you start writing. Now, once you've got the plan, you can start writing your letter. It'll be easy to write your letter once you've got a plan. You'll have a good idea of what you're going to write about in response to the 3 bullet points, and so the stage will be easier. And this is why I'm telling you that writing a plan saves time. Do all your thinking together as one process rather than having to continuously stop each time you get to a new bullet point to respond to. Then, hopefully, if you've still got some time, proofread your letter. Alright, so here's the task that we're going to do today. If you want to see the written form of all this, I'll put a link in the description below this video. Okay, let's just go through it fairly quickly. You live in a room in college which you share with another student. However, there are many problems with this arrangement and you find it very difficult to study. Write a letter to the accommodation officer at the college. In the letter, describe the situation. Explain your problems and why it is difficult to study. Say what kind of accommodation you would prefer. Okay, and then the topic will look something like, and then the task instructions will look something like this after we underline some of the keywords. Room in college, share, problems, difficult to study, accommodation officer. Okay, so we get some sort of sense of what the requirements are from this sentence here. That basically we're living in a room, there's problems with this room that are preventing us to be able to study effectively, and we've got to write a letter to the accommodation officer. Okay, then we get to the bullet points. Now, the golden rule is to respond to each of these bullet points in their own paragraph. Okay, you don't want to stuff two responses into the same paragraph. You want paragraph, paragraph, paragraph. So we're going to have 3 body paragraphs, and it's incredibly important that each one of these paragraphs does an excellent job of answering each question. Now, I've seen quite a few letters in response to this task instructions, in response to these task instructions. And the problem that occurs often if a student hasn't bothered to make a plan is this. The candidate describes the situation and does a good job of this, and in doing this really answers the second question about the problems. You see, these two questions could be very similar. Situation and problems could be the same. So what I'm saying is, if we read this here and then we start describing the situation, we might be describing why it's difficult to study, what the problem is. Okay. And then what happens is, if you describe a problem here, let's in the sample I'm going to show you, basically the candidate outlines a problem of a noisy roommate. So describing the situation, they're describing a noisy roommate and why that's creating a problem of not being able to study. Okay, so the original letter looks something like this, and the key thing I want to highlight your attention to is that there's only 2 real body paragraphs here. So really what's happened is the first 2 questions have sort of been answered in this paragraph. They're sort of stuffed and lumped together. This then makes it difficult for the examiner to work out how good the response is to each question. The examiner is trying to establish the situation and then the problems. Putting them all together in one paragraph like this is not great, and I think this is due to a lack of planning and a lack of appreciating the subtle difference between describing a situation and explaining problems. I'm going to show you a model answer later that will illustrate this more clearly. So let's go through this letter a bit. Let's start off looking at the introduction. I'm writing this letter to express my dissatisfaction with my roommate and request another accommodation next term. And my room number is 201. Okay. So the first paragraph should always be the purpose of the letter. This letter does a really good job of establishing the purpose. So far, so good. Note that roommate should really be written as 1 word and not 2. Okay, and then ideally we should start off with the situation now. The situation, not the problems. If we jump straight onto problems, then what are we going to say for the situation? This is why I'm saying this task requires upfront planning. Otherwise you go straight into the problems. The problems sort of become the situation, and it's hard to have a clear response to each of the bullet points, and then this makes it difficult to get beyond 6. Okay, so remember, it should be about situation and not problems. To begin with, the main issue. Well, issue is really a paraphrase of problems. So we can see here that the writer's going straight on to problems, which is very typical for people who don't plan their letters. Okay, so the main issue, the roommate has friends visiting and parties and this, which ends early in the morning. And it's noisy, and so it's difficult to study. And so you see, these are sort of the problems. There's parties, there's noise, he can't study. And then on to borrowing things. Okay. So there's some reasonable sort of problems situation here, but they're all lumped in together. It's difficult to determine it's difficult to determine exactly what the situation is and what the problems are. They're sort of lumped all in together like a bowl of spaghetti for the examiner to sort out, and so this is not ideal. I'm telling the writer here that this first part is not really responding, of this next paragraph, is not really responding to any of the questions, and this is a problem. Paragraphs should start with a phrase that signals which of the three questions are being responded to. This one does a good job of this, to begin with the main issue. If we want to write a paragraph about problems, this is a good way to start a paragraph. This one, not so much. Well, let's have a look at the first sentence. Let's see if we could guess what the paragraph is about from the first sentence. Last week I had a midterm exam, and for that I went to the university library late at night to study. Well, that doesn't seem to be responding to any of these. It's really like a solution to the problem, which was not requested. You're not asked to give a solution, and by giving a solution it sort of makes the problems become less. If you can just go to the university library, then why is it a problem to have a noisy roommate? The next sentence doesn't really help. I have some important exams after 1 month, and I really need a quiet place to study. Well, you've found one, the library. Just go to the library. You don't have any problems now, and so your letter's not going to be great because you've been asked for problems, and now you seem to be suggesting that you don't have a problem. And if I was the accommodation officer, I'd say, great, go to the library and stop bothering me. You don't need a new room. The next sentence, I'm a very bright student and do not want to lose grades just because of some other person. Yes, I agree, but what question are you answering here? It's not a problem. It's not about the type of accommodation you want. Hey, wow, this would be really good to describe the situation. Wow, the situation is I'm a student who really needs to study hard for some reason. Fantastic. I've found the situation maybe now buried deep in this letter. I could now tick off that this candidate has described the situation. But what if I'm the examiner and I don't realise that the response to the first question is stuffed here after the response to the second question? This is not great. It's easily missed. It's also not great in terms of cohesion and coherence, because we have an idea here that was not signalled up here and therefore is kind of out of place in the letter. It's not clear why this is here in the letter. And I think this could have been a good first body paragraph. This could be a good situation. And then this is occurring because a plan was not made. If the writer thought of the ideas first, then this could be the first body paragraph and the letter would be greatly improved. And actually, I'm going to take this idea and do this in my model answer. My idea sort of comes from what the student has written here. And then the third bullet point is covered quite well here, that they want a single room. So they're specifying what sort of room they would want. And good finish to the letter. Oh, I just noticed another error. I am looking forward to hear from you soon. That, of course, should be hearing. I'm looking forward to hearing from you soon. Yours faithfully. This is a good way to write to a person you haven't met before. We usually use yours sincerely for people we know. On to the scoring, 6 for task achievement. It's really that issue about the... I'm not really satisfied about the answer to this. I have to look very carefully to find this. And I outlined that we want a clear distinction between the situation, maybe the need to focus on study and some sort of reason why you need to study more than most people, and then I've given the reason of needing grades for a scholarship, and then on to sort of the problem, that's sort of what's causing difficulty for this situation. And we've got the noisy roommate sort of idea here. The tone was pretty good in this letter. An appropriate tone would be saying something like the roommate is an absolute arsehole or something like that, to use some foul language. Or another instance of inappropriate tone would be to demand the accommodation officer give me a new room. That would be a bit rude and inappropriate. We always need to make polite requests. I've given 7 for coherence and cohesion and coherence. Overall structure good. Well, actually not really. I like to see a paragraph in response to each of the bullet points. This is not exactly an IELTS rule. I just think it's a good idea. It makes the examiner's job easy. They can see that there's a clear response to each of the 3 bullet points. It's a kind of risk-free way of writing. There's no way the examiner's going to feel you haven't responded to any of the questions. Paragraphs start with a phrase that indicates what the paragraph's about. This is done in places, but the problem, of course, is that the candidate doesn't have a paragraph for each bullet point, and so it's kind of difficult to do this, but I have seen some ability that it can be done. So I'd sort of say this is a low 7. I'm not really excited about the structure of it, but other than this sort of problem of not having a clear paragraph for each bullet point, there aren't too many other issues. And I like the opening and closing of the letter. Vocabulary, pretty decent on the whole. Roommate, 1 word, not 2. Oh yeah, this is the other part I didn't like. A single room with no share, without sharing with no roommate, something like that. That's the other issue. Now you might think, well, there's only 2 real problems. Yeah, but there's not too many words with a part 1, with a task 1. It's hard to get to 8 with I would call this quite an ugly error. It suggests to me that, this part here suggests to me the person's not an 8. Other parts, it could be. This sentence is quite nice. There are some things that I like about this. Very bright student, that's nice. Idiomatic language. It could go to 8. Just in the end, decided to go for the 7, mostly because of this really ugly error. Grammar, 7, couple of errors with articles, 1 error with sentence structure. Let's take a quick look. Can't really see what's wrong here. I think I added these words in. I think originally it was which I think is totally implied. It's probably just, I mentioned brain fart in another video. It's just sometimes we have an idea in our mind and we know how it should be written, but it just doesn't come out that way. Okay, here's the errors with articles. I went to university library. It could be a university library, I suppose, but presumably it's the university that he studies at, so it would have usually 1 library. So we're referring to this sort of 1 library of the university, and when we're referring to something specific, something that in this case would be clear to the accommodation officer. It doesn't really have to be clear to you reading this, because you're not the intended audience. It's the accommodation officer. The accommodation officer would be aware that the university has a library and what this library is. So I went to the university library. Late at night. I really needed a quiet place to study. It could be some places, but that wouldn't really make sense. So it's a quiet place to study. Again, I could consider 8 here. Those errors with articles are quite minor. However, the 2 of them, But then I also had to add these couple of words in, and again, it's a very kind of short sample, so I think 7's justified. And wait, we have another one up here too. Early in the morning. Early in the morning. So I think, we're looking 1, 2, 3 articles. That's possibly enough on its own, and then we have these omissions of words. Omissions with an O. Omissions of words. Sometimes it's a bit of a coin toss. One more error here. He also has parties, plural, so no S on the verb. Yeah, I'm convinced 7 for this. There's just too many errors. Note the density of them too. You see a whole lot of errors all in a row like this. Not great. 7. And so we've got 6 for task achievement, 7 for cohesion and coherence, 7 for vocabulary, 7 for grammar. That would come out to be 6.75 rounded down and not up. So 6.5. May seem unfair that it gets rounded down. That's the reality. You just have to accept it and deal with that. And then for me, the main thing stopping this letter from being a 7 really is not having a clear paragraph about the situation and another one about the problems. This is totally avoidable. It's avoidable by getting into the habit of planning your letters before you write them, and also from knowing that you have 3 bullet points and you want 3 body paragraphs, each one responding to a bullet point. So, alright, I'll go on to my model answer now, and as I said earlier, there's a link to this, the written version of this, in the description below. So, if you find you want to take some time to read it, you could have a look down there. I'll just go through it fairly quickly. I want to make some comments in some areas. Okay, so we got the dear sir or madam, that's fine. And then we want to have the purpose of the letter. It's incredibly important that the purpose of your letter is clear, and that the purpose of your letter is clear right at the start. So what I've got here, I'm writing this letter to express my dissatisfaction with my roommate and to request another room. I suppose if I wanted to write a little bit less, I could maybe get rid of this. Anyway, that's what I've got. Now, this is how I'd write a formal letter, like to someone I don't know or for some sort of formal purpose. If I were writing to a friend, I might have a soft opening here, something like, it seems like ages since we've talked, or I hope you and your family are doing well. We might have a little bit of a softener before the purpose. However, with a formal letter to a stranger like this, we do not do that. Straight into the purpose. Okay, so after the purpose is clear, we should then go on to our first bullet point, describing the situation. And I want to start off with something that sends a signal to the reader that the paragraph is about this. And so I have paraphrased situation into background. Please allow me to give you the background for my request. I'm currently on a scholarship, and in order to maintain it, I must maintain a minimum of an A- average. In order to achieve this, I have to study diligently every evening after classes. Okay, so I've set up this situation. The situation is I'm a student who must maintain a score. I'm on a scholarship. This is not really an option for me. If I don't get the grades I need, I'll lose my scholarship. Then we want to, now that we've established the situation, we want to go on to the problems. And note this plural S. This is incredibly, incredibly important. Since it says problems, I must include more than one problem. If I only have one problem, I will not be fully responding to the bullet point. I'll be limiting my task achievement to 5. Let's see why. So now we're looking at 5 for task achievement. This is the publicly available grading criteria. And it's this one here. presents but inadequately covers key features bullet points. Key features would be academic version of the test. The general version, it's about the bullet points. Okay, so if we mention one problem and not two, we have inadequately covered the bullet point. We've covered it, we've got a problem, but we've inadequately covered it. Now, if we don't mention problems at all, which would be hard, then it drops down to a 4, attempts to address the task but does not cover all bullets. So if there are no problems, thinking back to that sample letter that I showed you, the student version, if the examiner felt the situation wasn't covered at all, then that would be a 4. Or if they thought it was covered but inadequately, which is arguable, it is arguable that the situation was not adequately covered, then it drops down to a 5. You see, so it's really important. This pluralization is really important, and you must watch out for it. Okay, you might have a really fantastic coverage of a problem, band 8, but you only mentioned one problem. You're getting 5. This may seem cruel. This is IELTS. It is cruel. This is the grading criteria. This is what examiners follow. So back to our task. We must cover problems. I've got 2 in there. Let's have a look what they are. So I've got the issue. This sends a signal to the reader that I'm covering the problems. And we've got roommate. The issue I'm having is that I have a roommate who is a sports major and likes to work out in the room after classes. So here's sort of one of the problems. One of the problems is he likes to work out. And then the next problem, plays heavy metal music when he works out. I guess these are sort of 2 related problems. Thinking about it, I could have 2 clearer problems in this paragraph. If I were to rewrite this, let's see if we can rewrite it a bit. Okay, then we get on to paragraph 2. We start with a signal to the reader that the paragraph is about problems. Let's change that to plural. Okay, so we start off with a signal that this paragraph is about the problems. The major issue I'm having is that I have a roommate who is a sports major and likes to work out in the room after classes, which makes a lot of noise. And then a signal for the second problem. He also likes to invite his friends over to party until the wee hours, which is making it difficult for me to sleep well. Okay, so let's have a look at our model letter. We start with Dear Sir or Madam. We put in the purpose for the letter. I'm writing this letter to express my dissatisfaction with my roommate and to request another room. I could possibly leave that out if I wanted to, I guess, just to shorten the letter a little bit, but it's not a huge issue. And this letter is not excessively long. Okay, then we want to respond to the first bullet point. Remember about the situation. We want to describe the situation, and I've paraphrased or rephrased to background. Please allow me to give you the background for my request. And we go on to this situation. I'm currently on a scholarship, and in order to maintain it, I must maintain a minimum of an A- average. Okay, so we're giving the reader basically the reason or the background to the problem that we're going to describe in the next paragraph. In order to achieve this, I have to study diligently every evening after classes. Okay, so we're making it clear to the reader that we have a particular need. We're establishing a particular need. We're giving the situation background for the request and for why the problems that follow are an issue. And okay, then we're on to, then we want to explain the problems. Problem paraphrased into issue. the major issue I'm having is that I have a roommate who is a sports major and likes to work out in the room after classes, which makes a lot of noise. Just making that clear to the reader. We could just say that he works out in the room and leave it up to the reader to sort of connect the dots and realize that this is a problem. Even better if you can make it explicit. This last part of the sentence is maybe the difference between a level 7 and a level 8 or 9 writer. We need to have another problem. He also likes to invite his friends over to party until the wee hours. Again, this is probably enough, but let's make this even clearer to the reader about why this is a problem. Hey, well, for some people this might not be a problem. Party till the wee hours, fantastic, what great fun, what a great way to relax from your studies. We want to highlight to the reader why it's a problem, which is making it difficult for me to sleep well. Now we should respond to the third bullet point. Say what kind of accommodation you would prefer. Prefer, I've got suit me best. The type of room that would suit me best would be a single room. Okay, so we've specified a type of room. Now you might be tempted to just think, okay, I've answered the third bullet point. It only said to specify, it wasn't in plural like the other one. It says what kind of accommodation, not what kinds. So we only really need to give one. So from some perspective, we could argue that, okay, we can finish the letter now, or we can finish this paragraph. We've answered the question, yes, okay, but it's not wonderful. It's not wonderful to only have one sentence to respond to a bullet point. Write a whole paragraph. One sentence paragraphs are not great. Let's have another sentence to have a fuller response to this bullet point. However, if this is not possible, I would like to change to a room with someone who is quiet and also focused on studying. Alright, so now we've finished that paragraph. Now we just have to close the letter. Yours faithfully, and then our full name. Full name because it's a formal letter. Doesn't make sense to just write Samuel who. And we write yours faithfully because we're writing a formal letter to a stranger. If we're writing to someone we know, it's better to use yours sincerely. Alright, so in terms of task response, we've responded to all three questions. In terms of cohesion and coherence, the overall structure is excellent. We've got words that are signaling our response to the 3 bullet points. Alright, so I hope you can see the importance of planning your essay up front before you start writing it. If you missed it, that cruel aspect that I was talking about is that it's extremely important to watch out for pluralization in the instructions in the bullet points. In this instance, the bullet point mentioned problems. This means you must have at least 2 problems, and if you don't, you can't get above 5 for task achievement because you haven't fully responded to the bullet point. I've put a link in the description below to the full written version of this model letter that I showed you in this video today. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. That will help others to see the video. It'll make my video more popular and more likely to be seen by other people. If you really liked it and would like to see other videos as I make them, please subscribe to me. This way you'll get updates each time I release a new video. Good luck with your studies.